Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of From the Lighthouse. I'm Stephanie and I'm here today with my co-host Michelle. Hi Michelle.
Hi Stephanie.
And our extraordinary producer Jimmy.
Hi Stephanie. Hi Michelle.
Hi Jimmy.
And we're all here together today because we have just gone to see, separately, Murder on the Orient Express, the new adaptation of Agatha Christie's wonderful and very, very famous and very, very filmed and adapted novel. So what did you think, guys? Did you like it? Did you hate it? And can we talk about Kenneth Branagh's moustache? Because for me, the entire movie was about that moustache.
Well, I actually want to hear what Michelle has to say about it first, because we ran into each other before coming here, obviously, and we deliberately avoided talking about it because we want the reactions to be genuine.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
This is our first conversation about this.
Look, I have mixed feelings about it, and I think I was expecting that anyway, because out of Agatha Christie's, enormous it's probably one of my least favourite in terms of, I don't like the sort of the collective murderer. I don't know why.
Probably should give me a spoiler warning before that.
Spoiler warning.
Well, I can't see that you could talk about it without
you
giving
can't.
it away.
Can't,
But,
yeah.
but you do need a spoiler alert.
Yes,
I
yes.
apologise.
Yeah, we'll put a spoiler alert in the show notes.
But actually, if you've seen the original, the Hercule Poirot...
Yeah, and I think that,
television-
a novel that was written a good 70-something years ago, is fine.
Yeah, and also I wondered, going
plenty of
into
time.
it, I wondered whether or not they would sort of change the plot. And I was sort of hoping they would, because, as I say, I love watching the Friday night mystery Hercule Poirot, but that particular that particular storyline, it's never appealed to me.
It's too cute.
There's just it felt more contrived. It sort of changed the sort of the it was like a game changer, and I got to the end and I just sort of felt a bit dudded the first time that I watched it. And I can't remember reading it, but I think I did. But it was my teenage years that I did my Agatha Christie reading. And then I was hoping that they would change it in some way. And, of course, it didn't. And also, I'll be perfectly honest, I'd gone into the movie imagining that it was Johnny Depp who was going to play Hercule Poirot. And so when the opening sort of, and I realised that no, that's not Johnny Depp. I just had a slight little plummeting moment.
To be fair, I think when I saw the cast list and I saw Johnny Depp, I did think, he was going to play Poirot as well.
Good, so I wasn't.
Yeah, but then I read up on it. So, okay, well, he's not going to be Poirot. He's going to be Ratchet, which was quite an interesting choice, I thought, for Depp, because he normally plays that sort of quirky, charming character.
I have to say that the casting of Depp actually impacted upon my enjoyment of the movie, because I think the fact that he still has a career when it's known what a terrible person he is in his private life really makes me angry. So I was angry at this film before I went to see it, which I think also coloured my perceptions of the movie. I was like, why do we...
But he plays the criminal. He gets stabbed to death.
I know, but even still, he's a terrible person. He's a wife beater. Like, why do you have a career?
I didn't. I mean, I have to say, I don't see much sort of Hollywood news, so I didn't know very much about. Last time I knew, he was.
He's a domestic abuser.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So why does he have a career? Why does he get to be in?
Oh no, I had no idea.
Yeah. See, I've just ruined Johnny Depp for you.
Well, I mean, I wasn't a particular sort of. I mean, I've never had a very strong sort of. I don't know what do you call it. Sort of
interest.
Interest in Depp. But last time I heard he was living in France, and that's about all I know.
No, that was quite some time ago, Michelle. You need to read some Laney gossip.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it relied on the cast, I think. Respect.
It's a bit of stunt casting,
well,
I think, too.
I thought the cast was a little bit underused. I actually thought Branagh stole the show.
The moustache stole the show. Come on, that moustache is worth, like...
Yeah, I mean, that was the moustache to end all moustaches.
Yeah.
But what were you going to do? I mean, you were either going to copy it or you had to go completely,
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's always interesting, different actors' interpretation of Poirot. One of the first interpretation I saw of Poirot was, oddly enough, Murder on the Orient Express with Albert Finney, the 1974, I think, version of it.
Yeah.
And his Poirot was almost alien. He was really bizarre. And I loved his Poirot. I thought he was just so... interesting and strange, and then all the other Poirot became very conventional, and then Branagh came along and almost made Poirot into a slightly autistic man of some sort. You know, there's this obsessive compulsive quality to him. I don't know how I felt about that while I was watching it. You didn't like that?
No, because I actually felt there was too much of an effort to humanise him with the sort of the backstory.
The backstory intensely irritating.
Yes, the whole love thing. Yeah, that annoyed me.
The sort of the symmetry with the eggs and the cow pat. I think I was actually annoyed from that point on.
See, that didn't bother me too much. Maybe because I was used to watching things like House and other Sherlock Holmes adaptation where it becomes very obvious that these detectives have these very human, obsessive, compulsive qualities about them.
It reminded me of almost of something like House or Monk. You remember that show Monk
Yes,
that was on in
I
the
loved
90s?
Monk, yes.
Yeah,
I liked
but
Monk.
it kind of felt like it was too obviously a riff on that, and it just I just didn't connect to Kenneth Branagh's.
I felt it a bit predictable. I felt it a bit predictable. See, I think the thing that I was irritated with the eggs and the cow pat was that it felt like a really predictable interpretation of the autistic sort of detective.
Could be a dentist, you
Could
never
be
know.
a dentist, yeah.
Well, you wouldn't know underneath.
Yeah, you're zonked out on drugs.
But yeah, and that was the thing. I felt this does feel a little bit like a cliche. I don't know. Like that was, I don't know why, but I was, and also I felt that there was something really self-conscious about that. The treatment of the colonial aspect, which I mean, of course, it's great that they did sort of consider these sorts of things and have the doctor roll up his sleeves and help the Indian worker on the ship. Where were they at that point? They weren't in India, were they?
I can't remember.
Yeah. And I thought, well, but at the same time, there was just something that all
Istanbul,
felt a little bit contrived about it.
Yeah.
There was just, and I didn't feel as though that had been absorbed into the fabric of the film. It all felt very planted, I think, for me. I didn't enjoy that moment. It felt false.
To go back to what you were saying, Jimmy, I did feel the cast was underutilised.
It was.
Because you had all these big names, but I felt like they did nothing, or most of them did nothing.
Well, for me, the most disappointing one was Judi Dench, because she's so fabulous.
And she was nowhere.
And yeah, she wasn't really, I mean, see, the problem is I have the 1974 version stuck in my head, and Wendy Hiller in the same role was just phenomenal. She almost spat out her lines, with contempt at Poirot, and, Dench's performance was almost understated in comparison and not very well fleshed out, whereas it was much more fleshed out in the other version too. I sort of felt as if I knew the Princess Dragomir off a little bit better in the other version than I did with this particular version, where she just seems to be obsessed with her dogs.
Well, but I also think that in the particular setting, the confines of a train, it actually was imperative that all of the characters were fleshed out, because by really just focusing on Branagh, it sort of added to the sort of the slightly I guess I want to say perhaps just a little bit of boredom.
I think that was my main complaint with the film, which was that the focus was too much on Poirot and not enough on the other characters.
And he's not a character to hold that. It needed to be that sort of that lovely sort of collective performance that left you at the end.
I almost felt as if this film was trying to introduce Poirot to a new audience and say, well, let's introduce the character Poirot, whereas those who knew Poirot...
the Nile, the murder on the...
Death
on the Nile would have been a better...
well, I think that's going to be the next one.
Yeah, but I think that would have been a better one to start with. I know that the Orient Express has all of those sorts of exoticisms and that sort of initially spurred it on, but it seems to be probably one of the titles that are most recognisable, most instantly recognisable out of Agatha Christie's work, I think.
Well, I think it's because of what you mentioned before. It is a game changer. It's one of the first murder mystery where everybody is actually turns out to be the criminal.
But you really have to have very good characterisation for that plot to work, and it wasn't.
Well, the thing is that the cast was there. They had a terrific cast, but maybe the script underutilised them. Michelle Pfeiffer, I thought, did quite a good job as Mrs. Hubbard. But again, I'm sort of comparing her with Lauren Bacall, who also did a fantastic job as Mrs. Hubbard. The one that really disappointed me was Penelope Cruz in the Ingrid Bergman role. Ingrid Bergman was just amazing, and then this one was really, really underused. Like, I just felt the characters didn't have enough time on screen to really develop them and made us care about them.
I think it was almost setting up Poirot as like the new superhero franchise.
Yeah.
You know, like, and he's going to be in all of the, you know, we need a backstory for him so that we care about him. And
I don't
like,
think, think you do.
And I don't think you do either. And I think that, like, I don't know, he's not like of the Christie kind of detectives, I much prefer Miss Marple to him. But I also think that, like, you don't read an Agatha Christie for, like, a psychological study of Poirot. You read it for the characters, the other characters. You read it for the mystery, the puzzle. Like, you don't actually
and for the murder. Like,
and for the murder,
it's fantastic. You read it to discover how on earth somebody managed to
get away with this and set it up in the way that they did. Yeah,
exactly. So if that's not the emphasis, then you're out of whack, I think.
I don't read, especially with Poirot. I think, to me, who, as I said, always less compelling than Mrs. Marple. You know, I don't read it to kind of like cheer him on and be like, "Yay, Poirot, I love you so much." You know, it's not the kind of.
It's a different formula. There's a different formula.
He's meant to be quite insufferable, and I think even Christie herself, you know, finds him quite insufferable. She's always preferred Marple herself, and I think she was once asked why is it that Poirot and Marple never met, and she said that's because, you know, that they would just hate each other.
She'd probably whack him. Yeah,
she'd have no time for him.
Yeah,
she just wouldn't have any time for him. I mean, it would be a 1 minute exchange, and she'd be off.
Yeah.
I also think there was a kind of arrogance in Kenneth Branagh's performance. It was just like he directs the movie, and it was all about him, and it was just, I don't know. I found his performance really kind of irritating, because
there is something. He's a difficult character. He's I mean, there's a, even though it's sort of problematic, she is using that sort of Belgium identity in a particular way, which is, I mean, the Belgium, the butt of jokes. You know, which they sort of nodded to at the beginning with that sort of scene at the opening, but it's not about reintroducing that. It's about the idea of making him a character who doesn't fit in. Not in this context because of his Belgiumness, but because
he's meant to be completely alien, almost completely other.
And I think that opportunity was missed in this sort of warm and fuzzy. And even it was. Do you know what it was? He was more of a Shakespearean character than a sort of a nice detective, you know, or a difficult detective.
Yeah, I think. I mean, for me, Poirot is meant
to be. I could
be.
imagine him doing a monologue at some point. You know, as he walks along the train tracks.
I mean, look, I'm of two minds about it, because on the one hand, I didn't mind Branagh's performance of Poirot as much as you two seem to have minded it. What I did really like about it was the focus, or the shift, more on the victims this time, as in the not Ratchet, but the previous victim, the Armstrong family. There was a humanisation of that I found quite moving and quite interesting in terms of exploration. I like that focus, and I think that's one thing that Branagh always does with his films. There's a humanist spin to a lot of his films. He's tried to apply that to this one, and I think it worked on that aspect of it. But the part that I agree with you guys that I don't think it worked was on the humanisation of Poirot as a character. Adding that background story, I think it's a love interest. I'm not quite sure. It could be it could be a daughter. It could be something.
No, I think it's
I think it is a love interest. I don't think that quite works for me. And the one that really irritated me above all else was his anger at being forced to be complicit in this lie that they're telling. That for me was very, very un-Poirot. You know, Poirot is a very amoral character.
Yeah, he wouldn't care.
He wouldn't care. And in the novel and in other adaptations, except for the Suchet version, which again follows the same one, he does care. Or other adaptations, and in the novel, he doesn't really care. That's why he presents them with two choices to begin with. I mean, if you cared so much, you just wouldn't present them with two choices. You would just say, "Look, you're guilty. Off you go," you know, and that's done. But this one, he's sort of like, "Well, look, there's two choices. You choose. But I'm really annoyed. You're gonna have to kill me first to get this one done." And then it turns out to be a ruse and everything. And I'm like, "Oh, no, that doesn't work for me." But the focus on the victims, that did work for me, because I felt quite moved by that montage of tragedy that sort of occurred throughout. And in a way that sort of fleshed out some of the other characters a little bit more, but not enough to make me develop any sort of attachment to them. I think the only character I was really attached to was possibly Michelle Pfeiffer's Mrs. Hubbard. And quite surprisingly, I didn't think I would like this change, but the young guy, I think Tom Bateman, who they got to play Monsieur Book, the manager of the train. Yeah. He's meant to be quite an old guy, but this one was very charming, very almost like Wildian figure, and for whatever reason that really worked for me, because I thought it added a lightness to the entire atmosphere that was almost missing, and I found his character quite engaging. So I didn't mind that change, but other changes I had major issues with.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't hate it, and I mean, and there's also a certain trains are kind of fun, and the atmosphere is quite enticing. This idea of getting dressed up and being on this posh train and travelling across the countryside is I think quite attractive. I'd like to be on the Orient Express, maybe with a bit less murder going on, but it's kind of you like that kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, and there was something really sort of expansive and exciting in the opening, and there was a real sort of sense of atmosphere, and I did want it to work, for me, because I actually love, it's Friday nights. I just like to watch it. I don't want anything more. Who doesn't love
Christie,
I really, really wanted it to work, and yet you asked me what Amin thought.
Yes, I did.
He fell asleep.
So Michelle's husband fell asleep.
I was so furious because
he doesn't snore, does he?
Well, he does, but he didn't get the chance because I hit him a couple of times to wake him
I
up.
watched a film, not with somebody, but someone sitting behind me was snoring for the entire time, and I nearly wanted to strangle her. And she had the gall to wake up 15 minutes before the movie ended, and then at the end of the movie said, "Oh, that was a terrific film."
No, you didn't. You didn't see it.
No, almost turned around and said, you.
But it's actually the kind of film you could fall asleep in, because it's so But it's not bad, but it's kind of inoffensive. It's just sort of there.
But visually, though, it was quite beautiful. So I'm kind of surprised he wasn't sort of visually stimulated, at least by the scenery and the cinematography.
I think we were in the Orpheum. And we certainly had a good 15 minutes where I think he was. And then somewhere along the line, I looked over and his head was tilted back and he was fast asleep, and I tried to wake him up because it's not often we go out together, and I wanted to have a partner, watching this that I could talk to about.
Talk to us about it.
No, he doesn't.
Well, look, to be fair, I did watch it with a friend, and I won't name names because he'll probably kill me if I mention this. But I did notice from the corner of my eyes that he did nod off at one stage, and then sort of corrected himself.
I reckon it's the kind of film that's eminently sleepable.
Yeah, well, I
it's so inoffensive in a kind of. I mean, there is action sequences, but it's a kind of movie I can just see myself falling asleep in.
Those action sequences, I have a gripe about those. They don't work for me. Yeah. Poirot is not an action hero.
I know.
And he should never be an action hero.
But also Christie isn't.
No, she doesn't write in that
She doesn't
genre.
write action.
Far more interesting would have been, and this was the thing that I think was lacking, was that there was no real sense of suspense. So, I never really had that feeling.
I did read up about that slightly, because one of the things that they knew that this story was so famous and so popular, there's no way they could sort of build up or generate any suspense.
Well, I think you can,
that.
because I watch every Friday night. I sit down and watch,
film.
Poirot, or I watch Marple. You know what's happening. You know where it's going to end. It doesn't change the fact that, sort of given the right camera angles, a bit of music, and somebody looking vaguely afraid, you get a bit of...
Well, I think that this is an interesting one to do, which goes back to your point of maybe another one would have been better, because this is one I actually forget who is the murderer in most Christie novels, because after you read a few,
I know that's marvelous, isn't it? Yeah.
They go out of your head because they're so plotty. You're in it when you're reading it, but you don't need to remember.
But this one's hard to forget.
But this one is hard to forget because this one and say the murder of Roger Ackroyd and stuff, they're too famous conclusions. So you can't forget. This is the one, and Roger Ackroyd, I just can't forget. So yes, there is. How do you create suspense?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's one of the questions that unfortunately none of us here can possibly answer.
Yeah.
And it's probably, I'm interested in, and I've asked a few people who haven't read the book or haven't seen any of the film, to let me know as soon as they watch the film what they thought of it, because I'm really, really interested to see whether that lack of suspense for us came from just being so familiar with the story and the plot.
I don't think it was set up. I don't think it was set up. I mean, I don't think there was any effort to court that kind of visceral reaction in the
Which is bizarre, because that's why you read Christie.
Yeah, it's what you want, isn't
Well, one
it?
of the things that I did notice while I was watching it was that I was looking out too much for the clues that the film was going to give out about who the actual criminal was. So I was paying careful attention to every single reveal, and I think, oh, okay, yep, so they're priming that up for that. And so I can see my mind ticking, and it really annoyed me because I wish I could have switched it off and tried to enjoy the film from a less technical perspective and just sort of see what the film's doing. But I was looking at every single red herring and saying, okay, that was trying to do that, and that was trying to do that, and that was trying to do that. And it stopped my enjoyment of that aspect of the film.
The thing that I noticed, because generally speaking, I'm just watching, sort of the whatever channel it's on, the sujet, and so it's not sort of really a schmick production by any means. And the thing that I think the promise was there, because in actual fact it was really, cinematically beautiful. And I think that if they'd really sort of focused on the ability to bring that sort of amazing, sort of immersive quality to the film that you don't get in those earlier versions, with the sort of the fun suspense, which isn't proper suspense. It's the sort that you enjoy, because I don't like thrillers because they get too scary. But
this is cozy crime.
It's cozy crime, and it's fun crime, because you're sort of laughing at yourself for being just a little bit afraid when you know that there's nothing scary.
Well, that's the perennial appeal of Agatha Christie. Like it's
so
about murder,
managed.
but it's so cozy, and it never feels threatening. It never feels too violent. It's always very genteel. It's always
and
very
also the wrong
makes you
people
feel
never
good.
get killed.
Exactly.
I mean, that's lovely, because you can safely get attached to somebody and feel that things will work out for them.
And you know that it's all going to be resolved in a very neat way, and it's comforting to read. That's why we keep reading. It's just, I know, like, if there's something, if I need to, read something, if I feel like reading something that's going to make me, enthrall me and satisfy me, but not be too kind of intellectually taxing or emotionally draining,
Yeah.
I'll just pick up a Christie. It's like having, a warm cup of tea.
And I think there was real potential there. I mean, with those opening shots, I was just thinking, oh yes, this is glorious.
Yeah.
And
great clothes, great environment,
Well, there's a technical theory that could possibly support what you're saying here about why the film didn't work in terms of suspense. So one of the things that people have pointed out is that in the 1974 version, which was directed by Sidney Lumet, all the shots, once you get inside the train, was inside the train. And so it had this sense of claustrophobia about, everything was sort of building up and getting, trapping people in. And Lumet's really good at that. He did 12 Angry Men, and one of his famous things was, slowly move the camera from bottom all the way up to the top, so that by the end you're almost staring down on people. So he created a sense of claustrophobia through his camera. But what I noticed Branagh did was that he removed you from the train several times. He kept moving the cameras away. He kept going outside the train, kept moving back in the train, going on top of the train. So he does very flashy moves.
I wonder if that was pandering to an audience that he thought wouldn't accept the, that sort of.
I thought it was too
response.
gimmicky and very distracting. So the discovery of the body for me didn't work, because I was just being really annoyed by the fact that the cameras were situated on top of them, and they were just sort of they almost looked like experimental lab rats or something like that, running from one place to another, and it just didn't work for me. And I just felt it removed me from the story.
But it also removes that sense that this is like a locked room mystery, where you know that somebody there has to be the murderer, and so therefore you are fraternising with, or hanging out with, or living in the same spot as the murderer, and that's the kind of appeal of that.
I mean, even the reveal at the end, he gathered them outside of the train, had them sit on this long table, and then sort of had this open space to make that reveal.
Like the supper, the Last Supper.
Yeah, and he did the whole Last Supper imagery thing. But in the 1974 version, they were all in a train, very confined. They were all sitting almost like like school kids while he's sort of directing this story around. So there's this sense of claustrophobia, this sense of suspense that's been built up But in that one, it's more, I guess it's more action-based.
I actually
possibly.
also think that maybe Branagh was too charismatic. Do you know what I mean? Because in actual fact, when you think about, say, Sachet or other versions...
Sachet does that well, yeah.
You know,
yeah.
he's such an unassuming... So the only thing that draws your attention to him is his intellect, is his ability to do this. And so it's this incredible sort of moment where this person, who in every other way, shape and form, you wouldn't necessarily, sort of utterly sort of...
Well, except for the moustache. You know.
Yeah, I know, but
Poirot is famous for the moustache.
But that moustache is it's more of an annoyance, because I always have this sensation, it must be sort of. But do you know what I mean? Because he's deliberately little, he's deliberately sort of stout, he's deliberately awkward. He's not the sort of person who commands attention. Except by the time you get to the end, you have so much need for him to be able to unfold things for you that you're really drawn to him, and that therein lies that wonderful enjoyment that's specific to this character. Whereas Branagh all the way through was eating up the shots and sort of sort of being really sort of almost heroic, which was
a bit hammy too, a bit campy.
Was fun. You don't mind that. Except then he wasn't really campy, because it was he was so clearly a heterosexual man with maybe just inklings of attraction for Michelle Pfeiffer in that. And I
think it's more attraction for the what's her name, the Daisy Ridley.
The Daisy Ridley character.
Yeah, so Mary Debenham character, because there was a sort of a hint at some sort of attraction between the two of them, and her character, I thought her performance was good, but her characterization didn't quite work for me either. So there were some issues there with her. Actually, there was quite a lot of issues I found with a lot of the characterization. A lot of them didn't quite work, and the amalgamation of some of the characters didn't work for me either.
But they didn't really have any fun with sort of the red herring either. Do you know what I mean? Like, yes, of course, it just seemed fairly obvious that it was his assistant who'd sort of done it, and there was no real effort to sort of bring that sort of sinister brooding moment where you might think, well, was it her or what? Do you know what I mean? Which is part of the pleasure, because you sort of need to be invited to consider your suspect, but there wasn't really that enough effort or enough sort of resting to allow the reader to allow the viewer to actually get wrong, because part of the pleasure is being wrong, is
Yes.
thinking. Because it's right. Sometimes you don't remember which character, even when you've watched it before. Sometimes you can't remember. Most of the time, I can't remember.
Yeah, that's
which
right.
is why I like the detective fiction. But it means that you're wrongly suspecting characters,
and that's a wonderful part of detective fiction, when you're entirely sure that this is the person, and then the last minute, it's this other person, then you go, how did I miss that? That's the part of the pleasure. That's why we read it.
But it is. It's fun to be wrong. It's fun to have that moment where sort of the book or the film has had you guessing.
Yeah.
I didn't make any effort to guess in that one, and yet I know, because it wasn't that long ago that it was on Foxtel or whatever, and I'd watched it, and it's still that sort of effort to remember, and I think that's why I don't like The Collective Murder that much, because in all the other...
You're forced to remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just reread And Then There Were None, which is one of Christie's standalones, in that there's no detective figure in it. And I didn't remember who was the killer, the murderer in that. And, there is that sense of suspense, and there is that sense of working it out, and there is that sense of, not being sure what's going on, and being wrong and being misled. And that was so much fun to read, and I just had a ball with that. And this movie misses that, the fun and the pleasure of that kind of process of like, no, I'm sure it must be this person. Oh, hang on, because in
reevaluating,
and then of course,
reevaluating.
For anyone who knows, And Then There Were None, they all end up dying off in various orders. So
murder really.
Yeah,
murder things.
I know. So like the person that you think is the murderer ends up being the next victim, and so you. Okay,
and I think that's what I was hoping, that there would be
you
a twist on the plot, or
Yeah.
something that would.
But I don't think that could have changed.
But yeah, I was going to say, I think that would be problematic, because if they do change it to that degree, it wouldn't be Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah, because that's what's so
It
famous
is. Yeah,
about
that's-
Murder on
I
the
would have
Orient
started
Express.
with a different one.
I would have started.
I
I reckon Death on the Nile would have been good.
Yeah.
I would have gone with Murder of Roger Ackroyd, only because I love that one.
Yeah, but that's another famous.
I know it is.
Yeah.
But it's a good one to introduce Poirot, because he's not central
Yeah, that's true.
to that particular story.
He's really not central.
He's
to that
really
at
not
all.
central at all. He's just sort of almost there on the sidelines, and then he comes in almost at the end. So I think that one's really interesting. Whereas this one, I guess,
It was
it could be...
forced upon you.
Yeah.
That's my feeling.
Yeah.
It could be just a victim of its own popularity. It's such a sensational story, and it's such a game changer that there's really no way that they can make it new and interesting to people who know the story so well. I mean, personally, I found it, while I was watching, I did enjoy it because I thought, I didn't go in with expectations of change because I just thought there's no way, even if I thought as much as I possibly can, I wouldn't be able to change this story in any way to make it new and interesting for people who know it. Once you know it, that's it. You know it. Yeah, that's there's it kind of diminishes it. Whereas with other stories, you can sort of play around with that. But this story, it's almost like that. The ending is the main reason to see or to watch or to read this particular story. So to change that would be to defeat its purpose in a way.
I wonder too. I'm just trying to remember. Is this the only Agatha Christie where it's based on the murder of a child?
Don't know. Jimmy would know that.
I'm just trying to think through the various, because I think that was my feeling all the way through. It was as though it had strayed into sort of different territory because it becomes a much more.
Well, it was based. Christie based the story on the what was it? The Lindbergh baby, which was sensational at the time. So it had that allusion to it, but she wanted to concentrate then on what happens if justice gets perverted, and people then take justice in their own hands in this particular manner.
I can't think of another Christie that's about the
because usually you're not that troubled by the people who are killed.
Yeah, no.
It's my,
Well, yeah. You never feel kind of like,
and it's not
social.
About
I think that's what I actually really liked about this story, that there is a sort of social conscience and there is that blurring of between the lines between morality to some extent, because at the end you are rooting for the killers to get away, just as the characters in the stories do as well, because you almost feel as if that's the right ending. That's you wouldn't have it any other way, because the other way would mean you're quite angry that in a way Ratchet got away with such a terrible crime. So for me, it's I guess it's part of the story. It has to be.
Well, I suppose that's that is a justification for choosing Murder on the Orient Express, because as you say, like with a Christie novel, you don't get the sense that like the social order has been disrupted, and
they're not moral dilemmas.
They're not moral dilemmas. It's not like crime as a function of like the sickness of society. No. It's just like somebody's died. All right. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on now.
So I think that's obviously how I like my detective fiction. I'm not sort of wanting the sort of the grey area.
Yeah.
Well, not in Christie at any rate. I mean,
that's like, but that's the appeal of cozy crime. Like you can read about all these like the examples of cozy crime that I like to kind of think about is Antonina, who is our head of department. She gave me these detective books, which are about a dog detective, and he helps. And they're called the Chet and Bernie books, and they're actually narrated by the dog, and he sort of helps. He has a human owner who actually solves the crimes, but he helps by like sniffing things and doing doggy things like that. And they're so delightful, and they're about like murders and crimes, and they do have a kind of bit more violence in them, in that it's contemporary, and it's there's drugs and all this, but because it's a dog, it's so much fun. Like it's just about him being happy to like stick his head out the window and feel the air on his face, and he gets like treats when he solves the murder, and he's really excited about that. I love them. They're about crime and violence and drugs and murder and death, but they're about a dog, so they're delightful.
I'm going to have a look for those over Christmas. That sounds like my Christmas reading.
Oh, and he loves sniffing out crimes, and and anyone who knows dogs know that they really enjoy sniffing. So they're wonderful books. I don't know how you'd film it though.
Well, you can make it an animation.
Yeah, that's true.
Or something like Babe, or
that's true.
That style. It is possible.
But the real appeal is like the narration through the dog's eyes.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I'm thinking Babe meets Poirot.
Yeah.
kind of idea. So
talking dogs.
Yeah.
That's not far from.
No, that's true. We could do that. Chet and Bernie. Go and read them. They're really great. Yeah. And actually, I was listening to somebody, another podcast actually, they were talking about cozy crime. And they were pointing out that one of the first, I can't remember the name of the books, but the first kind of cozy crime books post Christie that kind of really leaned into this kind of coziness of crime were about a cat and a cat detective.
I have heard of that,
Yeah.
I can't remember the title now, but yeah, no, I have heard of that one.
Yeah. But, I mean, there is an appeal about reading that kind of cozy, and they might have a lot of tea and biscuits and
they're safe, aren't they?
And stuff. Yeah, they're really safe.
Yeah, you're not likely to encounter anything dark or anything disturbing to some degree.
Too dangerous.
Too dangerous.
Justice will always be served.
Yes. It reminds me of what, I've forgotten which Bronte's sister now, said about Austen's novel that they covered.
Charlotte Bronte.
Yeah.
She was
nice
so
little
wrong.
picket.
Charlotte Bronte's rereading of, or misreading of Jane Austen. Yeah.
Lovely little picket fences around it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, see, I like crime on both levels. I do like the cozy crime, but I also like the darker crimes because I'm really into serial killers. We won't go there. But
in a theoretical
sense.
You might want to expand upon that just briefly before we let you.
No,
do not be alarmed. Jimmy is not a serial killer.
He's talking about podcasts,
movies, books.
So
if
the police looked at your Google searches,
they would be very concerned.
They would be very concerned.
They'd be very concerned. So I think literally my last Google search last night was most violent female serial killers.
Just to, as out
because,
of interest.
I was interested because I thought there's a trend that male serial killers tend to be very violent. They often torture their victims. But female serial killers often poison their victims.
Yeah, poison is like the woman's...
Yeah, the woman's choice. But here's the really interesting part. The theory is that it seems like there's more male serial killers because they're mostly caught. The female serial killers tend to get away with it for much longer and sometimes even go undetected.
Yeah, there was a great story I heard on yet another podcast. I mean, we just released our podcast on true crime podcast. So obviously we talk about this stuff a lot. But there's a great story about a nurse. I think it was in the early years of the 20th century. I can't remember what her name was or where I heard this. But she was basically killing her patients in massive numbers by just dosing them up with drugs or poisoning them.
Yeah,
and
I think
she
I read
went,
that last night.
and I think she went undetected for 20 years because if you're a nurse in a hospital, patients die, right? And so there's not necessarily a correlation between
and people aren't suspecting.
If you're in hospital, chances are you might die. So she got away with something like 60 or 70 murders because nobody, until it was it became kind of too much and too coincidental that all of her patients died further down the track. She just got away with murdering everybody through poison. It's amazing. Yes. This conversation has spun completely out of control.
Yes, I know.
I feel like it might be my fault.
Yes, it is your fault. But Christie actually does deal with a lot of poison as murder as well. Because that's what I was thinking of. I think that's why I was searching all that because I thought it's unusual for Murder on the Orient Express to have a female. She wasn't just the only killer, but she was the head. She was the leader of the party. But this killing wasn't. I mean, there was poison involved in that they poisoned Ratchet first, but it was a very brutal, very violent crime. It was a stabbing crime. And from what I've read about serial killers, stabbing is a very personal thing. You often do it to people you know or people you hate or passionate about.
You're very close to them.
You're very
not
close
too often.
Yeah, so watch out the two of you. That's all I'm saying. No.
Michelle and I turn up dead. This is... Podcast listeners, please use this as evidence.
Especially around the end of semester when Jimmy's feeling particularly pressured.
Yeah. This is, they'll put it on the news and say the clues were embedded in their podcast.
But, I mean, even if you watch this particular version, all the violent stabbing were the men. They did all the violent stabbing, except for Mrs. Hubbard. And she does a very, really one at the end, almost, she just drive the whole point home. And it got me thinking about the differences between the sexes.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, but it's possibly a little bit more disturbing going back to the whole serial killer thing because it's not just simply patients, but female serial killers tend to murder people who tend to be helpless or tend to be within their control of some degree. Children are quite often, so they often murder their own children quite a lot. Patients, the elderly. There's one, I think, in Mexico who murdered 40 elderly people, pretending as a nurse.
Yeah.
But they don't kill for pleasure. Most of them don't tend to kill for pleasure, whereas men do tend to kill for pleasure.
So what do you mean? Are they killing as in
They're
mercy
killing for
killings?
sometimes mercy, sometimes.
Is that really murder then? I'm not.
Well, that's the.
Or for material gain.
Or for material gain, quite often. So most of them, are black widow killers, so they kill off their husband to pick up the insurance money or something to that effect, or get the money or something to that effect.
Or just get rid of troublesome husbands.
Yeah, true.
Or just husbands who fall asleep in movies.
Yeah, exactly.
It's turning into quite a therapy session.
I know.
But I think, all jokes aside about Jimmy's weird fetish for serial killers.
Fetish is a strong word.
I don't think that this is actually weird, and I think that's why we like reading Christie.
It is.
Because it is the most comforting, cosy, safe place to read about all this stuff that everybody's interested in.
And acceptable. You say you like Agatha Christie and everyone's like, oh, that's wonderful. You say you like serial killers and everybody sort of takes a step back.
And says I don't know about this. Yeah, exactly. I mean, everyone likes reading about this. It's been a perennial, issue, topic of interest since, the
But what fascinates
time.
me, though, is that she does have insights into these type of killings.
Absolutely.
So the more you read her work, the more you actually see how they do tend to reflect what's actually happening in the real world, but they happen in a very safe, confined space.
Exactly.
So it does create a safe
Also, I don't think
space
she
to
ever
read.
hesitates from making a woman a killer either.
No, she doesn't.
And I think that's the thing that I like about her. And when I was listening to you talk about, sort of Michelle Pfeiffer as the mastermind, I was actually thinking, well, no, that is an aspect of the, sort of murder, the Orient Express that I do enjoy, is because there's no effort to, I guess, defer that responsibility across the others. She was wholeheartedly the sort of let's face it, logistically it was a difficult one to plan.
Yeah.
So
and also to have her
really...
as an actress as well, because she was a famous and a brilliant actress, and so of course she would be the
I feel like I think perhaps in the effort to get so much across, because it is actually a fairly rich sort of text, that perhaps the end result was that it lacked the sort of the singular vision to sort of carry it all the way through. And
I think that's my complaint from the start, which is that I would have liked to see more focus on the characters, to flesh them out a little bit more, because I think I don't know about you guys, but I read a lot of Agatha Christie works for the other characters, for the side characters.
Yeah.
I don't really, you get a lot of Poirot. I mean, with all detective fiction, you get a lot of the detective already. You don't really want to read more about the detective. It's actually all the other characters and their lives and the intricacies of their lives.
And the motivations. Yeah, the motivations. Because Agatha Christie's motivations are generally pretty convincing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You always feel, I mean, I've often felt, you often feel, well, that was a fair enough motive. That was a fair enough motive.
Well, in that sort of situation.
Michelle, I think you would be more dangerous as a killer than I would.
Because she'd have a very good reason.
Yeah, she would like, you know what, that's a fair reason. He fell asleep during the movie. I can kill him. That's fair.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all so facto.
Now I'm feeling concerned.
Should we send this to him?
I'm feeling chagrin. Yeah. Oh no, I said it to him afterwards.
Oh, you said it to him afterwards.
It's all right. I just no.
So you're lucky there's a lot of witnesses around.
Wake up now. And besides, I did hit him repeatedly.
See, a little bit of violence.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A bit of action.
Yeah, a
bit of
little bit of
suspense.
elbows. Maybe it'll be murder in the
Orpheum. The Orpheum.
Orpheum Express.
The Orpheum. Don't you fall asleep when I take you to the movies.
Well, I think before we spin this completely out of control and start revealing our deepest, darkest secrets, we'd better wrap this one up. Thank you so much for seeing the movie and for speaking to me today, Jimmy and Michelle.
Absolute pleasure.
Stephanie.
And we'll be back in a week. If you could please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, that would be very, very helpful. See you later. Bye.